The fluorescent lights of Cascade General Hospital hummed with the same indifferent frequency as the stars. Helena Winters had studied for 43 years. She lay in the narrow bed, electrodes trailing from her chest like the cables she'd once connected to radio telescopes, monitoring not distant galaxies, but her failing heart. You were lucky, the cardiologist had said that morning, though Helena didn't feel lucky. She felt tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the heart attack and everything to do with 4 decades of searching silence for answers that never came. Through the window, she could see the city lights drowning out the stars. She'd spent her entire career at the Cascade Point Observatory, a modest facility 40 miles north, away from this light pollution, listening to the cosmos whisper its secrets. Except the cosmos had remained stubbornly quiet, at least in the ways that mattered. No little green men, no encrypted messages, no proof that humanity wasn't alone in its corner of an indifferent universe. Mind if I sit? Helena turned her head slowly. A man stood in the doorway, tall and slightly stooped, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the hallway light. He wore a volunteer badge that read Vincent Cross. "The chair's not going anywhere," she said, her voice rougher than she remembered. Vincent smiled, settling into the seat beside her bed. "I'm supposed to ask if you need anything. Water, extra blanket, someone to complain to about hospital food. I need to not be here. That's not on the menu. I'm afraid." He folded his hands in his lap, and Helena noticed the calluses, the slight tremor. "Working hands, old hands. You're Dr. Winters, aren't you? From the observatory?" She raised an eyebrow. "You follow the exciting world of radio astronomy?" "I used to build things that left the planet," Vincent said quietly. "Satellites, probe components, guidance systems for the Voyager missions, back when my hands were steadier and my eyes sharper. I always wondered if anyone was out there listening to what we sent." Something in Helena's chest tightened, and it wasn't the heart condition. "Did you ever think maybe they heard us and decided we weren't worth answering?" Vincent considered this, his gaze drifting to the window. "Or maybe they answered, and we weren't listening right. The universe is old and patient. We're young and in a hurry." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who'd spent their lives reaching for something beyond themselves, only to end up in a hospital room, smelling of antiseptic and regret. "My wife passed 2 years ago," Vincent said suddenly. "Cancer. I spent 30 years promising her I'd retire, that we'd travel, see the world instead of just looking past it. I never did. After she died, I realized I'd been so busy trying to touch the stars that I forgot to hold the hand right next to me." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I never married. Never had children. I told myself it was because the work was too important, but maybe I was just afraid. Afraid that if I let someone in, I'd have to admit that all those years listening to static might have been wasted." "Were they wasted?" "I don't know yet." Vincent reached over and gently squeezed her hand, his palm warm and solid, more real than any signal she'd ever chased. "Then maybe we're not done searching." Over the next 3 days, Vincent visited every afternoon, bringing contraband coffee and printouts of recent astronomical data he'd found online. They talked about pulsars and planetary formation, about the loneliness of scientific pursuit and the peculiar comfort of shared obsession. Helena found herself laughing for the first time in months, found herself looking forward to the sound of his footsteps in the hall. On the day of her discharge, Vincent helped her into a wheelchair despite her protests. "I'm taking you home," he announced. "I didn't ask for a chauffeur." "No, but you're getting one anyway. Someone needs to make sure you don't immediately climb up to your telescope and give yourself another heart attack." Helena smiled despite herself. "You don't know me very well." "Not yet," Vincent agreed, pushing her toward the elevator. "But I'd like to." When they arrived at her small house beside the observatory, Vincent insisted on staying to help her settle in. He made tea while she sorted through mail, moving around her kitchen with surprising ease, as if he'd been there before in some other life. "I should check the data logs," Helena said, more to herself than to him. "3 days of recordings I haven't reviewed. Can it wait until tomorrow?" "It's waited 43 years. What's one more night?" But even as she said it, Helena felt the familiar pull, the need to know, to search, to listen. Vincent set a cup of tea in front of her. "Then let's look together. If you're going to be stubborn, you might as well have company." And so they climbed the stairs to her office, where decades of data scrolled across multiple monitors, and for the first time in her life, Helena Winters searched the stars with someone beside her who understood both the vastness of space and the
Vincent became a fixture at Helena's observatory, arriving each morning with coffee and leaving long after sunset painted the valley in shades of amber and violet. They fell into an easy rhythm, two souls who'd spent lifetimes in solitude discovering that companionship didn't require constant conversation, just comfortable presence. Helena's health remained fragile, her doctor's warnings about stress and overexertion largely ignored. But Vincent watched her carefully, learning to read the slight pallor that meant she needed rest, the tremor in her hands that preceded exhaustion. He'd guide her away from the monitors, settle her on the worn couch in her office, and continue the work while she dozed. It was during one of these quiet vigils, 3 weeks after they'd met, that Vincent noticed something peculiar in the data from the night of Helena's heart attack. A pattern in the background radiation, so faint it barely registered above the cosmic noise, repeating every 11.3 seconds. "Helena," he said softly, shaking her shoulder. "Wake up, I think I found something." She stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. "What time is it?" 2 in the morning. "Look at this." He pointed to the monitor where he'd isolated the signal, enhanced it, stripped away interference. The pattern pulsed with mathematical precision, definitely artificial, definitely intentional. Helena was fully awake now, her exhaustion forgotten as she leaned closer to the screen. Her hands flew across the keyboard, running analysis programs she'd designed decades ago, programs that had never found anything worth finding until now. "It's not natural," she whispered, her voice tight with something between hope and fear. "Vincent, this is structured. This is language. They worked through the night, cross-referencing the pattern against every known astronomical phenomenon, every human-made signal, every piece of space debris that might produce false positives. By dawn, they were certain. The signal was extraterrestrial, and it was old, perhaps thousands of years old, reaching Earth only now as it crawled across the vast distances between stars. "We need to decode it," Helena said, though her hands shook with more than excitement now. Vincent caught her as she swayed, guided her back to the couch. "We will. But first you rest. I'll start building a translation matrix based on prime numbers, see if we can establish a mathematical baseline." "Vincent, I don't have time to rest. If this is real, if this is actually contact, then it's been traveling for millennia. A few hours won't matter." He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Helena, I didn't find you just to watch you kill yourself before we finish this. Please." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the concern etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he was worried. When had she started reading his face like she read data, finding meaning in the smallest shifts? "Stay with me," she said quietly. "Don't go back to your apartment tonight. I don't want to be alone with this." Vincent squeezed her hands. "I'm not going anywhere." Over the following days, they barely slept, sustained by coffee and the electric thrill of discovery. The signal revealed itself slowly, reluctantly, a mathematical language that used prime number sequences as verbs and harmonic ratios as nouns. It was beautiful and alien and utterly terrifying in its implications. Helena's background in linguistic theory, a minor she'd pursued in graduate school and nearly forgotten, proved invaluable. Vincent's engineering mind helped construct the framework to process the data. Together, they were stronger than either had ever been alone, their different perspectives intersecting to illuminate what neither could have seen independently. The message began to take shape on the 6th day. Helena sat frozen as the translation scrolled across her screen, each line more devastating than the last. "They were afraid of us," she breathed. "Vincent, they were afraid." He read over her shoulder, his hand finding hers instinctively. The message was a warning, sent by a coalition of civilizations who'd detected humanity's earliest radio transmissions leaking into space. But they hadn't heard invitation or friendship. They'd heard chaos. The aliens described humanity with a mixture of terror and fascination, a species that could compose symphonies while engineering genocide, that could paint the Sistine Chapel while building atomic weapons, that could love with passionate intensity while harboring the capacity for unimaginable cruelty. They'd never encountered a race so contradictory, so emotionally volatile, so dangerous precisely because humans could weaponize anything, including their own hearts. "We broadcast our wars," Helena said, tears streaming down her face. "Every conflict, every atrocity, it all leaked into space on radio waves. And we also broadcast our music, our love stories, our poetry. They couldn't understand how we could be both." Vincent pulled her close, feeling her shake against him. Maybe they couldn't understand because they evolved past it. Maybe they chose logic over emotion, survival over passion. Maybe they're still afraid because we remind them of something they left behind. Or maybe we're the only ones foolish enough to love when love guarantees pain. Helena whispered into his shoulder. He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "Is it foolish? I lost my wife. It broke me. I spent 2 years certain I'd never let anyone close again because the price of love is unbearable loss. But then I met you, and I chose it anyway. I'm choosing it now, knowing your heart is fragile, knowing our time is borrowed. Does that make me a fool?" "It makes you human," Helena said, and kissed him. The message continued to unfold over the next week, revealing that these alien civilizations had been monitoring humanity for centuries, watching from a distance, too frightened to make contact. They'd seen humans create beauty from suffering, forge bonds across impossible divides, sacrifice themselves for strangers, and destroy each other over ideas. The contradiction paralyzed them. Helena's health continued to decline. The stress of the discovery, the sleepless nights, the emotional weight of understanding humanity's isolation, all took their toll. Her doctor insisted on hospitalization, but she refused. Vincent managed her medications, monitored her vitals with equipment he borrowed from colleagues, and held her when the pain grew too sharp to bear alone. "We have to respond," Helena said one evening, lying with her head in Vincent's lap while he stroked her thinning hair. "We can't let them keep being afraid of us." What would we say? She was quiet for a long moment, watching stars appear in the darkening sky through her office window. "We tell them the truth. We tell them about us." Vincent's hand stilled. "About us?" "About 2 people who spent their whole lives running from connection because it felt safer than risking pain. About choosing each other anyway, at the end, when there's no logical reason to start something we know will end soon. About how love isn't humanity's weakness, it's our defiance against an indifferent universe." "Helena, help me build a transmitter strong enough to reach them," she said, sitting up to face him despite the way it made her dizzy. "Help me show them that humanity's real power was never our weapons. It was always this stupid, reckless, beautiful decision to love anyway." Vincent looked at her, at this brilliant, stubborn, dying woman who'd somehow become the center of his universe in just a few short weeks, and knew there was only one answer he could give. "Okay," he said, "let's fire back." The transmission array took 3 weeks to build. Constructed from salvaged radio equipment, donated components from Vincent's old aerospace contacts, and Helena's entire life savings converted into hardware. They worked in her observatory like alchemists, pursuing impossible transformation, turning metal and mathematics into a bridge across the cosmic void. Helena's condition worsened as autumn settled over the valley. She needed oxygen now, tubes trailing from her nose like the cables connecting their makeshift transmitter. Vincent had moved in completely, sleeping in the chair beside her bed when she was too weak to climb the stairs, carrying her to the observatory on better days when stubbornness outweighed sense. "Tell me again why we're doing this." she said one particularly difficult morning, her breathing labored as Vincent helped her dress. "Because 43 years of listening deserves an answer," he replied, buttoning her cardigan with steady hands. "Because you found something no one else could find. Because we're going to show the universe what humanity really means." She smiled weakly. Such a romantic. "Only took me 70 years to figure it out. They'd decided to make the message personal, intimate, stripping away scientific pretense to expose the raw truth of human experience." Vincent recorded their conversations, hours of dialogue about loss and longing, about his wife's final days and Helena's lifetime of self-imposed exile, about the peculiar grace of finding each other when time was shortest. Helena contributed her own recordings, reading poetry by Rumi and Mary Oliver, playing recordings of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and Miles Davis. She described her first glimpse through a telescope as a child, the moment she'd fallen in love with the stars, and how that love had sustained and isolated her in equal measure. But the heart of their message was simpler, more devastating in its honesty. They recorded themselves sitting together in comfortable silence, Vincent's hand holding Helena's, their breathing synchronized in the quiet of the observatory. They recorded her laughter at his terrible jokes, his voice reading to her when she was too tired to keep her eyes open, the small sounds of domestic tenderness that filled the spaces between words. "This is what we are," Helena narrated in a rare moment of clarity, her voice steady despite her failing body. "We are a species that knows love ends in grief and chooses it anyway. We are beings who create beauty while destroying ourselves, who reach for connection while building walls, who are capable of immense cruelty and equally immense compassion. You fear our contradictions, but our contradictions are our strength. We love not because it's logical, but because we're human. And being human means refusing to surrender to the cold mathematics of an indifferent universe." Vincent added his own testimony. "I spent 30 years with my wife, and I'd give anything for 30 more seconds. The pain of losing her nearly destroyed me, but I wouldn't trade that pain for never having loved her. Because the love was worth the loss. That's what you don't understand about us. We know the price and we pay it gladly. That's not weakness or foolishness. That's the bravest thing any species has ever done. They wove together music and mathematics, poetry and physics, creating a message that was both deeply personal and universally human. Helena included the statistical realities of human existence, our wars, our poverty, our environmental destruction, but contextualized them with our art, our science, our persistent attempts to transcend our limitations. We're not trying to convince you we're perfect, Helena recorded. We're trying to show you we're real. We fail constantly. We hurt each other and ourselves. But we also forgive, rebuild, and love again. Maybe that's what terrifies you, not our capacity for destruction, but our refusal to let destruction have the final word. The transmitter was completed in early November, just as the first snow dusted the valley. Helena was confined to bed now, her oxygen levels dropping despite medication. The doctors gave her weeks at most, possibly only days. "We need to send it," Vincent said, sitting beside her bed while snow fell silently outside. "The array is ready. We just need to input the coordinates." Helena's eyes were closed, but she squeezed his hand. "You do it. I want to save my strength for after we fire our signal into the void and wait to see if anyone's listening." Vincent spent that afternoon double-checking calculations, ensuring their message would reach the origin point of the alien transmission. As sunset painted the observatory in shades of gold and crimson, he initiated the sequence. The equipment hummed to life, drawing power from every circuit in Helena's house, from the backup generators Vincent had installed, from jury-rigged solar panels and borrowed batteries. The transmission array glowed white-hot as it pumped their message into space at maximum amplitude, broadcasting on frequencies designed to penetrate interstellar dust and reach across impossible distances. For 3 minutes, the observatory blazed like a small star visible for miles across the valley. Then, with a final surge, the equipment overloaded spectacularly. Vincent buried her ashes beneath the observatory on a clear December morning, the sky impossibly blue and filled with stars he could no longer see without thinking of her. He expected to feel the same crushing grief that had followed his wife's death, but instead found something gentler, sadness mixed with gratitude, loss tempered by the knowledge that their brief time together had mattered. He was preparing to sell the observatory 4 months. Later, when the responses began arriving, the first signal came from the same coordinates as the original warning message, but its tone was entirely different. Where before there had been fear, now there was something approaching wonder. They'd heard Helena and Vincent's message, had analyzed it with their superior technology, and had been fundamentally changed by what they found. Other signals followed, dozens of them from civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Each had received the human transmission, passed it through their networks, studied it with scientific rigor, and each had been forced to confront what they'd lost in their evolution beyond emotion, beyond contradiction, beyond the messy reality of love. One message, translated painstakingly over weeks, simply said, "We forgot what it means to choose. Thank you for reminding us." The global response was unprecedented. Helena and Vincent's message became humanity's first true contact with alien intelligence. But more importantly, it became a mirror forcing both humans and aliens to examine themselves. Scientists debated its implications, while artists found inspiration in its intimacy. Governments argued over response protocols, while ordinary people simply felt less alone in the universe. Vincent was invited to speak at conferences, interview with media outlets, consult with space agencies. He declined most invitations, preferring to stay at the observatory where he'd converted Helena's office into a small museum dedicated to her work and their shared discovery. But he did accept one invitation, to address the United Nations on the anniversary of their transmission. Standing before representatives from every nation, he spoke simply and directly. "Dr. Winters and I didn't set out to change the galaxy," he said. "We were just two lonely people who found each other late in life and decided to tell the truth about what that meant. The aliens weren't afraid of our weapons or our technology. They were afraid of our hearts, our capacity to feel deeply in a universe that encourages detachment. But that capacity isn't something to fear. It's something to celebrate, because it makes us brave enough to connect despite knowing connection brings pain. That's humanity's real power, not what we can destroy, but what we're willing to risk for love." The chamber erupted in applause, but Vincent barely heard it. He was thinking of Helena, of her face in starlight, of her hand in his during those final days, of the way she'd smiled when their message launched into the infinite dark. That night, he returned to the observatory and climbed to the roof where their transmission array had once stood. The stars were brilliant, undimmed by city lights, and for the first time since Helena's death, Vincent didn't feel the weight of isolation. Somewhere out there, across distances that defied comprehension, other beings were receiving their message. Some would dismiss it, others would analyze it, but some, Vincent hoped, would understand what Helena had understood in those final weeks. That love wasn't humanity's weakness or its weapon, but its answer to the fundamental question of existence. How do we matter in an indifferent universe? We choose to matter to each other. As shooting stars traced silver paths across the darkness, Vincent whispered to the void, "We fired back, Helena." And they heard us. They finally heard us. And somewhere in the cosmic distance, carried on waves of light that would outlive civilizations, a message traveled on, two voices entwined, speaking the simple truth that love, in all its painful beauty, was the only signal worth sending into the silence. The moment humanity fired wasn't when we unleashed our weapons, but when we dared to transmit our hearts. And every alien who heard it knew not fear, but recognition of something they'd almost forgotten: the terrible, wonderful courage it takes to love in a universe built on entropy and loss. In the end, that was the signal that changed everything.